On Netilas Yadayim, on washing the hands, we are continuing in the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah, Siman 159, Kuf Nun Tes, and we've been talking about washing hands, but we're now going to talk about how the washing is engaged. So you have to use a utensil, and so we're going to talk about which utensils are considered acceptable for washing the hands, and how should the water be poured upon your hands. This is a very long chapter, and I'm excited to get us started with it. We did learn a lot about washing the hands in the previous Siman, and we're going to learn even more. So this is probably almost as important as knowing when to wash your hands. So we went through the whole thing about that you have to have it for bread, or you have to have it when you're dipping it into other liquids, but not just to eat fruits. We talked about a lot of different times when you wash your hands. Now we're going to go through the actual ceremony itself. And we're going to see here that the ceremony is meant to recall another ceremony, which we will see the sources of these customs imminently. Shulchan Aruch says one can only wash their hands through a utensil. And all utensils are acceptable, even if they are what are called clay glalim, okay, meaning even if they are made from the refuse of animals, okay, and the Ramah explains what glalim are. Glalim are the utensils that are made from packed in manure and dirt, okay, and if you can make a utensil out of that when dried, you can do that. Also, if they're made from stone and earth, okay. So those are all considered kli. That's important. We'll see in a moment, because not all of these things are considered a kli by the Torah's definition. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Okay. Now that we said they can be made from anything, it now has to be able to hold at least a revius of water. A revius is about 3-4 ounces, and we're not going to get into the great dispute that is how to measure these things. But let's just assume that it's about 3-4 ounces. Okay. So one of those little bathroom cups should suffice. And if you have a perforation in this kli with the ability for it to accept a liquid inside of it, meaning that if you were to place it on top of liquid, the liquid would go in through that hole, okay, and it is larger than any hole that is inside of the utensil itself, then that would be acceptable for use, okay? However, if it's larger than that, then it would not be acceptable for use, because then it's no longer considered a kli, because the water goes in, the water goes out, it doesn't hold the water. It has to be able to hold the water, okay? So any type of hole whereby you could insert water, and then there would be another hole whereby it would be so large that the water would then go out of it, okay? Then that's not considered a kli. However, you need to have a hole for the water to go into it. Okay, so meaning you have to have the entrance has to be smaller than the exit kli, even so it has 2 of them in there. And you can't use that type of utensil to wash your hands. And even that's if the bottom of it holds a revius of it, okay, from below the hole and above. So let me just explain that last part one more second there. So it has to be able to hold that revius, meaning you can't have a hole in it or a crack in it. So if you put the vessel, this utensil, inside liquid, okay, it'll go through whatever the first opening is, okay, and that has to be smaller than the exit crack. If it's larger, then it's not a kli. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah on this. Okay, you can wash your hands with a kli. Why? Because the rabbis in the Talmud compared this rule to the rules of washing for the liquid that's used for the chatas, for sprinkling, and also for washing your hands from the kior, which also required a utensil. Okay, which needed a utensil. It didn't. It had to, because you can also dip your hands in a mikveh, which we'll get to later on. Okay. He doesn't say that. That's just me pointing that out. That's why we're saying it has to be a usable utensil. Then explaining that all utensils are acceptable, so whether they're made from wood, or they're made from bone, or they're made from glass, and so too if it's made from leather, as long as it can hold the water in it. And we're going to explain that further in depth in Halacha 4 later on. Okay? So the reason why we mentioned all these other weird utensil, the weird utensil manufacturing material. So if you made it from these random things like a mixture of manure and dirt and so on and so forth, because these things actually aren't really considered a utensil in terms of what the Torah would define as utensil, because utensils also can receive impurities. These items are not considered a utensil to receive impurities by Torah law, even though there's even rabbinic law against them. Nonetheless, they were considered to be a kli, and for our purposes can be used for washing your hands. Okay, so we mentioned earthenware, okay, or utensils made from earth. So this is sort of a raw clay or a raw material that is not heated in an oven. It's just left to sit out in the sun to dry. Okay. However, when it is dried in an oven, that's called cheres. Okay, and so that raises it up a level for receiving tumah. So if it's just made out of dried earth, it's basically considered a dirt utensil, and is not the level of a kli that the Torah was talking about. And the reason why it has to have a revius is because it's not a kli for washing your hands. Okay, and there's a long bir halacha here, which we'll come back to in a second. And revius has to be 1/4 log, which is 1.5 eggs. So as we said before, 3 to 4 ounces. Okay, now if you want to the test to see if your holes are too big and this doesn't work properly. So he said it has to be large enough to have water go in and water go out. So if you put water inside of it and it comes drop after drop, so that's how you know it's able to receive and exude liquid. So if it's larger than that, that's a problem. This works nice if it's smaller than that, that the liquid that's coming out of it is less than that, then it's kosher. But if it's not coming in from the outside of it into it, okay, then that's fine. Okay, then you can go ahead and pour it out the other way. So it comes in through one utensil. It's not going out through this hole. It can go back out through the other part of the utensil. That would be kosher. He says this even applies if the bottom of the utensil has been perforated. Okay, and meaning that it's not, if the hole doesn't have a revius underneath it. The hole is there, and the revius is sitting on top of it. So the Beis Yosef says that is okay, because it's not the fact that it has a hole. It has to be as long as the water exits. Okay. Now the Mishnah explains that you should really be strict with this if it's not a case of great need, and try to find another utensil. Okay. So so according to the Mishnah, he's saying you have to be strict. You can be lenient with a crack if it's above the revius level. Okay. If it's got at least 3 or 4 ounces below it, and if you poured water over, it would be a problem. But if you can enter some water into it. Okay, the Beis Yosef says as long as it doesn't all come out super fast, as it comes out really slow, that would be fine. Okay, and it doesn't. And whenever that water comes out, it's no longer considered a utensil, whether it was meant to be used for liquids or used for foods. Okay, none of those are a problem. So there's a really long bir halacha over here. Okay. So basically what he says is that it seems to be pretty clear that you have to always have a revius to hold at least 3 or 4 ounces. Okay, so the question is, what if it comes from something left over? Okay, and let's say it has the hole in it. Okay, so if there's not enough for it to have water go in through that hole, like it's a little tiny crack, and just because of the pressure of the water it pushes out, but you can't actually get water into it. So then to go the other way seems to be fine, okay? And there are Rishonim who say that should not be good, okay? So he feels that there's no reason to be strict on this, and he also quotes the Magen Avraham to say that as well. As long as you can't get a whole splash to come out in one shot, it's considered a perfect thing. Okay, I can't help you with that comment right now because it's not talking about our subject, which is about washing the hands. Okay. So, and now if you have a case where there's a second part that you could pour out, but it doesn't pour out in a straight shot, meaning you can't get a stream that's consistent. It like breaks up with drop after drop. So that would also be unacceptable. So therefore you only have to use the spot where it's coming out in its full power. Okay? Now, let's go on to the second halacha over here. Okay, so we got some interesting things in the Berurah halacha to talk about over there. Okay, so continuing in law number 2 over here, so it's considered a good utensil when you pour from the top, okay, of the vessel, above whatever crack that you found in it. Okay, because the problem is going to be the hole, there's additional hole or there's additional crack. Okay, and from those spots, that's not considered the utensil. That's not considered a usable utensil. Okay, and therefore the water is not considered as coming to your hands via a utensil. It's coming via something else, like a ramp or something else. Okay, now if you wash your hands through the hole, that's fine, because it has the hole on the bottom. So what we're saying is over here, if you have a full utensil, okay, I brought something along here to help demonstrate that. So you have a water bottle here. So you see that here's the top of the water. So if you were to make a hole, okay, above this water and pour it out that way, or if you use the top here like this, that would be acceptable. If the hole is down here or it's down over here and the water keeps leaking out really quickly, you're going to have a problem. Now, if it's just little tiny drips, then you could come around to the other side and pour it that way. Those would all be acceptable means of doing that. So I came prepared with some visual demonstrations for today. So back to Mishnah Berurah. Okay, so the reason why the spot below the hole is a problem is because that part's considered a kli, and that part has more than a revius of water, so all the volume goes there. So therefore, when you go above the hole, it's like you're using a spigot, and spigots have a different rule than a full utensil. Okay, so that's why we're saying it's not equivalent, and we'll learn about that in halacha hey later on in number 5. Okay, and that is the Shulchan Aruch's opinion, and his opinion is based on the Torah. However, a number of poskim disagree with this, and they say that if you have a cheres utensil, right? So you take clay and you've fired it in an oven, and it's meant to be used for liquids. If the hole in there's a hole, meaning it's not over the top. If there's an extra hole in there that has enough space in it to allow water to go freely through it, so then it's considered a broken utensil, and you can't use it at all. And you can't even use it through the hole, okay? And that's not at all like using a spout or a spigot, because that was meant to be that. I always appreciate the visual aids. Thought you were going to bring one of those travel washing cups for measurement. No, yeah, I thought about that. I didn't have one with me available. We try not to bring too much. Where was it? Okay, so if you don't have another utensil, then you could rely on the Beis Yosef's opinion so that you can go ahead and eat your sandwich, and that would be fine. Okay. Now, if it's a earthenware utensil, right? So it's been fired in an oven, and it's meant to be, and you're going to use it. It was only used to hold food, right? It's there to hold apples and oranges and other such stuff. Okay, and then the hole size has become bigger, so it has to have a hole larger to have a whole olive fall through it. Okay, or any other utensil. Okay, that have not been purified from their impurification, so there's been some tumah attached to it. Then the same rule applies that if it's holding liquids, the hole large enough to have water pass through it, that you can go ahead and pour through that hole. So the only dispute is with the earthenware utensil. So the Mishnah says that we're going to see later on in 162.3 that many people say over there that through the hole is only going to be permitted if it's large enough so that the water can pour out in one shot, like as we were mentioning earlier, because otherwise you can't just do drop after drop, right? That's what I mentioned was part of the problem. And also, this is just like if you have nothing else to use. It's better to simply find a full kli. Don't use any broken kalim. So that's what you should do. Okay. Now, we said that since it holds a revius, it could work. So other people, some later deciders after the time of the Shulchan Aruch, says that this is only when you have a perforation. Okay, but if it's a crack, so it's long. All right, it's not tiny. If it's a crack. If there's a revius of the utensil underneath the crack, okay, and the crack only lets a little bit of water in and out, it's still no good because now it's considered a broken utensil. And so since by the regular laws of ritual impurity, this wouldn't contract any because it's not considered a utensil, so therefore we're not going to consider it a kosher kli for washing your hands, okay? Because once it's broken now, it'll continue breaking forever until it's broken altogether. However, the Taz disagrees with the opinion. The first opinion is out of the Bach. He disagrees with his father-in-law. He says, no, cracked is like a hole. So it's only a problem if the crack can get repetitive drop after drop, okay? Because that's what we mean by flow of liquid flowing through it. The Chai Adam says that if you don't have another kli, you can rely on the Taz when you have nothing else to use. And even according to the Bach, if it's a brass utensil or something made out of other type of metal, okay, or if it's made from tin, that they are a little bit stronger, a crack isn't going to crack all the way through it, and so therefore you could go ahead and do that. Okay, and Berurah says that he goes through in the Biur Halacha a long discussion about cracked glass. Okay, if the utensil can't hold hot water, just like it holds cold water, then you shouldn't use it. It's not considered a kli. The Taz adds that fixing the utensil by putting in something to seal it. So he says that I don't think it works. He quotes the Ravid in chapter 14 of the Laws of Kalim. Okay, this is on the Rambam. He says that this doesn't work. Okay, and also to put some form of gauze or other type of thing across it, or pitch. Okay, those only work when you are using something that's made from earthenware. However, anything else, no. Now, if you use something that is the same material as that utensil, so if you fix metal with metal, okay, or wood with wood, so that works, okay? And he says, Tshuva says that as well. There's more to say about this in the Biur Halacha. So, in the Biur Halacha, he says over here that, what about fixing it? So that's the question. Does fixing it work? Okay, so he mentions about the issue with receiving hot and cold water, so that shouldn't work for glass. Okay, this is quite involved halacha here. I'm trying to just summarize it. Okay, and so in order to be lenient in this case, we need to find somebody that will basically agree that you have to use the same material and that it has to be sealed tightly. Okay, so the only exception is going to be if you use pitch on earthenware, because it's a different material altogether. Okay, so certain things are going to allow you to close it up, and other things are not going to. Now, you could use, for example, lead to fill in the glass. Okay. And that's because their glasses were made from different materials. They were lead based, so that wouldn't work today. He says that, but I'm telling you that wouldn't work today. And also it wouldn't work if you were trying to use some hot water. Okay, so therefore this Ravid is while it makes sense, we shouldn't really rely. My decision is to tell you not to really rely on it when it's entirely. It can't entirely seal it, and it doesn't use the same material from it. Let's see. We have time to do one more. the next one is very, very involved. So I think we're gonna hold it. Well, no, let's do it. Let's do it. Okay. So you have a utensil that holds 3 to 4 ounces. Okay. When you hold it all together, and if you don't hold it all together, the water is going to spill out. All right. So imagine you kind of like you have a utensil's kind of 3 parts. And you squeeze it, and when you squeeze it tight, it'll hold the water in there. But as soon as you relax, it pours out. Okay, and all the water pours out. It's not considered a utensil. Okay, so therefore, if you had a top of a barrel, and the barrel was it was pointy on top. Okay, and you have to actually hold. You have to flip that upside down and hold it so that it will hold together. That is not going to be good for a kli. Okay, and so if you took something wide, something like that. Now, if you were to take the same top of a barrel and spread it out so that it could hold that, and it could be left alone without being held onto it, then that would suffice. So it has to be able to hold it on. It has to be able to hold its own on its own. Hold water on its own. Okay. So Torah and Beis Yosef say that this is a similar case with a broken utensil. Okay, and the way that this breaks down is that you can't hold it together. And the case is like something where you break off from something else, which like the top of a barrel is a good example that they would have in their days. All right, or if you take the lid off of the lid off of something, it has a very large lid on something, and it with its sides could hold 3 to 4 ounces of water in it, but you couldn't hold it together so that it could do that. Now what we're saying is that some people even say furthermore that you can't use that either unless you actually now design it to hold the water in it. So the Magen Avraham goes through a very long discussion on this, and he says that you shouldn't try to ad hoc a utensil when it's broken off from something else or taken off of something else, because that's not really considered a kli at all, and the Gra agrees with him. Okay. Now that's only when you're using parts of or edges of the utensil. Let's say you have the kli that basically just burst out of the top. Okay, and the bottom half is still fine as it is because it's still holding together, right? So the top half of it, boom, it blew up or whatever happened with it. So with this, you could actually use that for a utensil to wash your hands because it's still functional on its own. But you can only use the part that was reduced from being a larger kli because you're basically using the bottom and the sides of an original utensil, and it has to be sitting up on its own. Okay, and you can't have the edge of it be lower than the top of the walls of it. So you can't have the one edge kind of dip down into it like that. It has to go over the top, because some people consider that to be broken and shouldn't be used for washing your hands. Okay, or jar to pour from the sides where there's no depression in it lower than the edge of the utensil itself. Okay, so that would be the same thing too if it was broken and then perforated. Okay, you want to make sure that it's not going to do that, and so basically we don't want to do that. A waterproof kli made of anything waterproof suffices, but that can also stand on its own. Okay, it has to be able to stand on its own. Okay, so even though we said it has to be able to hold the revius, it doesn't matter how much it holds. It has to be able to stand on its own. That's what we're saying over here now. It has to be that wouldn't have to hold it up. So if not, it's a problem. Okay, because the problem is that if it can only be held together by being held in your hand or by having something outside of it hold it together, that's not considered a utensil. Okay. So if you took something that's like a bunch of pieces of plastic and you stuck it in a koozie with your koozie, right? your koozie doesn't have a bottom on it, so it's not a kli itself, but it will hold the edges of it together like a big broken cup, and then put water inside the broken cup that's in the koozie. That's not going to work, okay? Because when you take the koozie away, it's all going to fall apart. Let's see. Now, if it was designed to be something that was opened and closed, and you have to close it together to make it into a kli, that would actually be considered a utensil, a functional utensil. And we'll learn more about that in Halacha 5 later on. Here we're talking about it somehow broke and it was reduced from the original spot, and it can't really sit the same way it used to sit or stand the way it used to stand. You have to balance it yourself, or something else has to balance it to hold it in the right place. So that's why it's a problem. It's not like it originally was designed. So we gave the example in the halacha over here of it being the cover of a barrel. So that's any top of the barrel, even like taking the top, or any type of taking the top off of a soda or something like that, that could hold a revia. So big top of it. Okay? And so some people are going to use that top, and that would be fine. But if some people even say that that's not acceptable unless you are going to use that for something else. So let's say you have like a really big coffee can lid, right? And it could hold 3 or 4 ounces in it, right? Like a really big, you buy one of those Mondo ones for Costco. You screw the lid off, you can get 3 or 4 ounces of water in there. So you can only use that if you're like, I'm going to use this as my washing cup now. Okay. And when we pointed out that it ended at a sharp point, because then it won't sit on its own. Okay, so then, but if it can't sit on its own and it makes this space for the water, that would be fine. But we said you can't use it because you have to hold the different parts together. So even if it was made to have this point on top of it, it's still not considered a kli because it was not meant to be used to hold something else, or to close another kli. And if it was done for that, it's going to be fine to use it for that point because it was meant to be used for that purpose. So that would be different than, let's say, a bag or a chest, okay, which we'll learn about later on. We're also strict about those because they were not meant to be a seat or a base. They can only support something if something else is supporting them, and that's not considered a kli. So even though you could, like, let's say, invert the top of a chest when it kind of rolls around and you put some stuff underneath it, and you could, put something inside of it, that's not its main goal. All right, so I think we'll hold it here. We will pick up next time in the laws of Kalim, pick up with halacha number 4. Thank you so much for joining. Look forward to seeing you next time.